I'll have you all start with a little intro of why we're needing to have this conversation, then we'll get right into those questions, okay?
All right, why? Why is it important for you to know about environmental justice? Because you're addressing inequities that have happened in the past, and basically, it affects everything that a person actually needs. I'm gonna start with a definition first. I hate to start with definitions, but sometimes you have to. Environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, income, and with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. It basically says no matter who you are, where you live, you have the right to a healthy and safe community where you live, learn, work, worship, recreate. Everybody deserves to be able to have clean air, clean water, and clean soil. But we also have to look at the history of development. How we use land um, has impacted what happens today. Those are called historical traumas. And so with those historical traumas and then the trauma of what happens today to an individual, you can see different things happening in our communities as far as divestment, higher crime, because people are creating alternative ec- economical systems. And you have to understand that we're just not talking about ecological, biological, physical environment, but also your social, political, aesthetic, educational, medical, and anything a person needs to thrive. And when you look at things through the lens of environmental justice, it changes things because you're looking like, okay, what has happened in the past and how do I make my people thrive? Um, so we we I am going to let you touch on like some of the sources that people can use to help them understand more. But these each questions, I could probably give you a week's worth of workshops for you to understand it, and you don't have time for that. So you need to tap people when it comes to development around energy, development around what our communities look like. You need to pull people to the side and say, okay, how can we make this better? And how can we make sure that our people are not overburdened and that they're not just feeling the pain from racism, but also able to access the profit. Because how we develop land, somebody profits and somebody experiences pain, whether it's displacement because of land loss or pollution causing health inequities, and it's so tied to everything that we're talking about as far as maternal health and everything. So I'm go, yeah.
I think it's very important to have this conversation because it affects black and brown communities. It affects our generations to come. And so it's important to have this discussion so we can be proactive versus reactive. I think right now we're in the reactive stage because so many things have already taken place that we're trying to fix now. And so it's time for us now to be proactive and see what does this look like in the long run, in the future, and how can we put different policies and laws in place that benefit our people. So that's why I think it's important to have this conversation today.
I think they said a lot and summed it up, so I'll be brief. But from my point of view, we deserve to breathe. We deserve to live. We deserve to have clean air and clean water just like everybody else. And we know that here in the United States of America, black people have always been put in these EJ areas, or we've been put in places that have turned into EJ areas, turned into places that are hazardous to our health because there has been no a type of rules around who can come into our community and polluters. So a lot of that has been the work that I've been working on in the General Assembly, trying to make sure that there are rules in place to protect people where they live. I come from a community where in Chicago, Illinois, where we have the highest levels of lead poisoning in the state, right? It's because Our homes haven't been turned over, and a lot of those homes still have that lead paint in there. And so that paint is going in the air. It's getting in our children's lungs. When I was a little kid, every other kid in my classroom had asthma, right? And I couldn't figure it out. But as I got older and I became an adult and had my own children, experienced my own deaths in my own family related to environmental justice, it became clear. It's just another piece of systemic racism that we have to look out and we have to put out. So that's why it's important that we have this conversation and continue this work. I don't think it's ever going to go away.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and dig into these questions. How can understanding the historical context of environmental justice empower legislative leaders to address current challenges effectively? Who would like to take that?
Okay, I guess the biggest understanding that you have to have is that we're breaking enslavement culture, because even in redlining, it dictated that people needed to stay closer to where they work. If they got a loan, bank loan, they could only go into certain communities, and that sounds like enslavement culture, right? And so you're breaking enslavement culture, and you're addressing scarcity and gatekeeping that has happened for over hundreds of years. And so that's the historical context. And that, even with the basic human right of having clean water to drink and clean air to breathe and not being afraid to go outside and play, because the softball team has to actually not play on their field because of industrial pollution. They have to travel 30 minutes away just to get started for practice. And so that's what that looks like. Why is it important? Because you get to make the rules, right? That's why you get elected. You have the power of the pen, and it is the most powerful tool that you have. And so with that understanding of what environmental justice is, and making sure that it's not just that we don't get in the trap of looking for jobs, and those are dirty jobs that's killing our communities. When you look at energy, that you just don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because they're saying, hey, this nuclear plant, this coal thing, and they start greenwashing stuff and saying, no, it's better this way. And you don't actually understand where the pollution is going. And understanding that climate justice has a focus on carbon emission. Environmental justice has a focus on all pollution. And so that's a distinction that we all have to understand, is because the overburden of pollution, say it's about 1,200 Superfund sites. In Tennessee, we got 95 counties, and over 200 of those Superfund sites are in Shelby County, which is a minority majority city, just like Detroit and different things like that. I can actually, if I sit down with you, I could probably tell you where your black communities are based on where the pollutions are. Even wealthy communities get to get it too, right? But I don't want you to just think that this is happening to black, brown. It's also a social economic factor that happens also in low wealth communities that may not look like us, and they are experiencing the same thing. It is affecting our health. It is a matter of life and death, and policies are a matter of life and death. That pen is a matter of life and death. Whether or not your community continues to experience premature deaths, or whether or not they get to thrive. And I know each of you have probably felt those premature deaths, because I know I'm not the only one experiencing here in Memphis, Tennessee. I've heard the stories all over.
Environmental justice doesn't deal with just the physical environment. It also deals with just the whole well-being of the person. And I used to be a behavior specialist, And we have so many students and constantly rising with IEPs. And you know, that is from a lot of lead poisoning and other issues in their homes. It deals with our mental as well. And so I look at that and the statistics of our students and black boys at that not being able to read on a third grade level when they're in the third grade. And so I think that this has a more impact than we think, you know, and it's just not about just the environment, but this is about the whole being for the family. And so I think that's why it's so important to invest in K-12 education as well, you know, to start talking about these things, these issues, and bringing it up now so we can see what does this really, truly look like for the future of our children. And I also want to state off record that it just feels good to sit in a room with so many beautiful black women, educated black women doing their thing. And I want to make sure I say that just because, well, I want to say that just because I come from a generation of family who did not have an opportunity to go to college, you know, and who faced a lot of issues growing up as well and living in poverty. And so it feels good to see how far we've come. And so, but we can only fix a lot of these things with facing these issues right now. So thank you all for being here and listening and also wanting to be a change agent.
So the question was, how can understanding the historical context of environmental justice empower us to address the current challenges? And when I think about this, I think about the way that environmental justice is being covered or advocated for in my state. And I would say that it is so important that we are the face of this issue and that we lead this issue. I know that there are so many other environmental organizations that have existed and that have helped us along the way. However, I find that that has really been a crutch in the state of Illinois because they want to cover our EJ issues the way they want to cover them, right? Because they're getting some grant from somewhere, but that's another issue. I need to see, and maybe we can help to empower kind of a grassroots movement, right? You have people in your community that are suffering from EJ issues, but in what way are we capturing their voice? And in what way are we taking that voice and we're turning it into policy? And so just in closing, and just again, from what I see in the state of Illinois, it's important that that people look like us leading the issue because we can better talk about it, right? We can better tell about our experiences and how it is affecting us. And I really see that kind of being an issue in my state, in the state of Illinois. She got a question.
Yeah, I was about to ask you too. Hey, here we go. One mic.
Since it's recording, I was like, okay, sure, Mike. I think this is a really pertinent conversation. I think, like you said, a lot of us talk about these issues, but we don't know the word to sum it all up. Earlier, at the beginning of your comments, you said how our housing is placed in polluted areas. And another great book, I'm sure all these amazing people have written a book, but another great one is The Color of Law. So if you haven't read it, read it, listen to it. I audiobooked it. Takes a couple hours, but you can do it probably on your drive to the session and back. It's a great time to get in those audiobooks. Our version of that, I said I'm from Kansas City, but my counterpart on the other side of the state, St. Louis, their infrastructure system hasn't been updated since the World Fair in 1904. Which means literally this year we've been passing legislation that the poor whites are on as well, like you said, to get rid of our lead. We use those Biden bucks to get rid of lead, specifically in our schools, because I'm at the state and that's what we cover. But also we have a underground nuclear fire that's been burning for 50 years that's by an underground water source, and it's by the airport. So it's in the middle. It's called Coldwater Creek. There's lots of documentaries on it as well. My parents lived in Chattanooga, Tennessee, if you need a local version of what that looks like, which is a major EPA site. And as development has happened in Chattanooga, making it one of the fastest growing cities outside of Nashville, there were people who had made little gardens in their yard because they're like, we're gonna grow tomatoes with the kids. Like, and this is just 6 years ago, and those kids are getting sick because there's still so much pollution in the ground from Chattanooga being one of the most pollution cities in the country in the 70s. We also call this social determinants of health. There's another word that I know that working with my health department that we use that talk about environment and how all of that affects. And yeah, I just wanted to say that. Thanks.
Another reason why you need to know is because right about now you have the biggest investments that we've ever had going into environmental. There actually is the White House Environmental Justice Council, a group of people that have been called together around the country to address the environmental justice issues through policy. And so there's a lot of infrastructure and different things like this. Actually, my mom died because of aging infrastructure, and she couldn't buy our property. And probably after she caught COVID, it was like she never could recover because the power outages is like 36 times within 3 months for 1 hour, 2 hours at a time. And so right now, when you see them trying to claw money, it's because they can't get to it and use it how they've been doing it in the past that causes marginalization. Because they've been able to do it. Right now, we have the biggest investments when it comes to water delivery systems, sewage systems, and all of those are, and also energy. And so we have to make sure that those dollars are diverted to the right, they divert it from the hands that misuse it and get it to our community so they do not look like they did 60 years ago.
Thank you. So in the state of Ohio, in Cleveland, where I'm from, I was a lead poison survivor and almost died of it. And Joshua, I think you and I crossed paths in DC at the Black Millennials for Flint, the whole award piece, so the green energy stuff. So I still want to talk to you about that. But one of the things I did as a legislator, which was really interesting, is I was able to pass a bill to invest $150 million of ARPA to promote directly and address lead prevention and mitigation. And that was unprecedented at a time because I think for one time in this General Assembly in Ohio, we were able to actually pass environmental justice reform in a way that was bipartisan. And, oh yeah, so, oh, thank you. And I say that because, oftentimes, we think that, like, we have to figure out how do we communicate this to Republicans because environmental justice is happening everywhere. We're talking about, I'm gonna say some ephemeral streams. Y'all know about that? You heard about that? So it's like these little small streams that lead into ponds, and when they get contaminated in farms, they ultimately lead to bigger lakes and rivers, and ultimately it pollutes the entire ecosystem, and from a farm to an inner city, what have you. But some of us don't live in the farmlands, right? And so one of the things that I was doing is working with Republican colleagues to educate them on how environmental justice is not just a Black issue, it is an issue of all of us, right? Which leads me to my next bill that I've been able to push, which was right now when it comes to lead mitigation, oftentimes when it's from the tree lawn to the house, you have to pay for it. And if folks know that, it's like $5,000, $7,000, depending upon the severity, to abate a house piping with lead. And so right now we have a bill that's bipartisan that is looking to provide that lead abatement at no cost to the consumer. So these are like just innovative things. And so my question to you, maybe two questions. One, what else have you all seen in other states that have pushed the envelope in terms of addressing environmental justice? And then two, my second question, I don't know if you're gonna blink this out in the video, do you think the infrastructure deal goes far enough to address environmental justice in a real and intentional way? Those are the two questions I got.
And that is the last question for the session, because it's going to take y'all 5-10 minutes. Absolutely. We're going to start with you.
Well, I know the DC lead bill that was passed to test, charters and public schools with 5 part per billion in the school to replace those water pipes. That is something that we also manifested in Shelby County as well, which was a big, great win with all charter schools and public schools there. So I do think there are some leeway and things being put in place and people listening to make sure that we kind of be change agents in that. The second part to your question, could you repeat it again? Because
The infrastructure bill, the Biden's bill that we got overproduced by Congress, does it go far enough to address the real and present dangers of environmental justice?
no, it's just no.
It's a Band-Aid, for real.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. So it is a Band-Aid, right? Because you have to look at how many years infrastructure wasn't addressed. And so, and then is that enough money to actually do an overhaul for everything we need for infrastructure? That covers energy, that covers transportation, that covers how our kids get to school with school buses. And it's so many caveats in that, right? And then if the money doesn't get used quickly enough, they'll start looking at it and trying to put it somewhere else. And they'll try to claw it back. And so that's what we've been doing at Sowing Justice with the Environmental Justice Leadership Forum, is like every time you get close to a shutdown, we have to go and say, hey, don't take our money away. Because environmental justice has never been red or blue. I've been working in environmental justice for 28 years, and believe it or not, it's more poor whites that have been working in environmental justice than it is Black people that look like me. It's still not enough of us, right? And so, is it enough money? Absolutely not. But it is a start, and that goes to show, once you educate legislators, whether they be red or blue, how it benefits their community to address the infrastructure, it is a start. We have to make sure that we can't wait no 10, 20 years for infrastructure. We have to make sure infrastructure is addressed constantly, and then not just on a federal level. We can't just let Uncle Joe decide when it's time to address infrastructure. It has to come from our local elected leaders too. You have to put money in budgets in the state, and also at whether you're an alderman or at the local level as a councilman, or however your structure is set up, it needs to be at the local level too, and you just can't wait for the federal government to set the framework. We should be setting the framework from our communities. And then when we face preemption, like what we did for zoning laws around the oil pipeline, deal with it as it comes. But you have to put it in place and then fight it. And had clean water delivery for 60 years, and you say it's gonna take 10 years to complete. Does that fix it? And so what can we do to make sure people understand that there's an urgency? It cannot take 10 years to roll out the solutions for the infrastructure. And how do we actually build out legislation where it happens continuously? As the technology updates, our community should be updated too. Government drives innovation. And so with that being said, with the power of the pen, you can drive how that infrastructure, and just not depend on the federal dollars to make it happen.
Representative Harper, I have one last question.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Okay, so Representative Harper, how can alliances with other organizations through coalition building enhance the impact of legislative efforts in addressing environmental and climate injustices?
All right. So we know that the more voices you have, the more powerful you are. And I think that there's definitely opportunity, not for us just to organize our own voices, but the voices of those others who are going through the same things that we go through, right? So in Illinois, that looks like the Southeast Chamber teaming up with the Little Village, who are the Latinos, teaming up with the people out in downstate, our Native American communities, and even teaming up with some of our downstate communities, because we all share those same issues as it relates to environmental justice concerns. Again, I think that it's going to take this power coming up to our state capitals, coming up to Congress, to really push the needle faster and faster on our EJ issues, so that, again, we can breathe, we can live, we can have a prosperous life like all the rest of the Americans in this nation.
All right, so in this last minute, if you have some closing remarks and be lean in your expression, what do you want everyone here and those watching later to do? So this is more of a CTA. What's our call to action?
Listen, partner with organizations like Sowing Justice, Black Millennials for Flint, and other organizations. I know like We Act in New York. And if you don't know who the environmental justice organization is in your community, reach out and we'll find them. And if because we know how to find them.
Definitely partner and put money into EJ organizations to make sure that they're being educated and being able to educate communities as well. And then to make sure that funding that is available is being distributed fairly and equally amongst our communities, and not going to communities that don't really need to be served, to make sure that it's in our Black and brown community. So just keeping up with that and being active with our local and state officials. You good? All right.
Well, we want to thank the three of you for being here as part of our first panel. We hope that what you've heard has been helpful and that you will go and take immediate action. So thank you so much. Let's give them a hand.